they'd heard me at church. I said, oh. I said, I haven't heard anything. You know, not that I didn't tell them I'd heard from the Lord, and nobody could convince me different. But God doesn't need help. November came and went, and December came, and it's getting near Christmas time, and I looked in the mirror and I thought, oh, you had better go see May, get something done to your hair. And I thought, you know, I, in the back of my mind, felt May had something to do with this. And I'm not going. I didn't go, but lo and behold, while I was out with my husband, May called the house, and my daughter said, Mom, May called you, why don't you call her back? Well, for some reason or other, I didn't even think about a glow or anything. I thought, I wonder if her husband's worse. I called her back. She said, are you ready to speak? I said, yes, I am. And then I proceeded to tell her. She said, you'll be hearing from the president. Well, it went till I spoke in February of that next year. But never once did I, God, you know, that's like a word of knowledge. See, sometimes he speaks through a word of knowledge, but you'll know it. Then there are other times you just wait to see if it comes to pass. You know, if it is, it will. You know, just experience after experience such as that, you know, God has never let me down. I could just stay here all night, tell you of healings. Our third son playing basketball in school, and we had just built a new church in Norwich, New York, and my mother was there. We had a contractor build the building, and we were doing the finished work. And I happened to be over the church, staying in the altar. When my mother come across, she said, oh, Marie, come quick. She said, the school nurse has just called. And she said, Lawrence has passed out. And meet him at the hospital. Well, all the way, I don't know why I thought, I wonder if something in his head, because it was broken. She thought it was a broken bone. She had said something like that. And I heard later from a lady that had an intercom system whose son worked on the medics, said, the Chamberlain boy is out, and we can't get him to come to. And his classmates told me afterward how blue he was, and they couldn't get him to come to. Well, I got out of those old pink clothes and went to the hospital. My mother's praying in tongues all the way there, and got there and he wasn't there. So you see how long he was out. And they brought him in. He was still out. It was like he was purging his body. I never seen such drops of sweat. The beads just, and I would wipe it and they just pop right back up. And I just sit there praying silently. They took all kinds of tests. It was his heart. No damage done. And the doctor just couldn't believe he could have been out all that time, but he was. God's still in the miracle working business. What's the important thing? Jesus wants to walk with us and talk with us, fellowship. He created us in his image, in his likeness. And, you know, God, just so fill us up with the presence of Jesus. So fill me up, Lord, that the lost I would win. So fill me up, Lord, you know, till it just overflows. You know, that's what he's predestined us, that we should be conformed to the image of Jesus. Oh, God has been so rich in my life. I spoke at other glows, retreats, spring rallies, ministers' wives. You know, this little nobody. One time, the district superintendent, when I was still living with my son Lawrence after his death, called and asked me to speak at a fellowship meeting, and I said, you know, I'm not even ordained or licensed. He said, well, we would like to hear from you. I stood up before those men and said, my God, how did you get up here? Well, God, you got me here, so you're responsible. You know, but all I know is to share Jesus. He's been real in my life. And twice. All the goodness of God since he passed away. I couldn't do those things. I mean, I was invited, my way paid. God has been so good to me. And I'm still working for Jesus. He still gives me strength. I never dreamed that at my age I'd be up behind this pulpit once again, sharing Jesus. But he's alive. He's real. You know, he doesn't want you. Peter talks, you know, Peter was a changed man after Pentecost. And he learned through a lot of hard trials. He didn't say it would be easy. You know, it said, think it not strange concerning the fire trials which are to try you. And so many places, I'm going to read some of these scriptures. He said, think it not strange of these fire trials, but rejoice. You know, Paul said over and over in Philippians, rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice. And he said, rejoice inasmuch as you are partakers of Christ's sufferings, that when his glory is revealed, ye may be glad also with exceeding great joy. Then he said, the trial of your faith is more precious than gold that perishes, but it might be found unto praise when Jesus comes back. You know, those trials are for a reason. Well, like Paul said in Romans, I believe it's the 5th chapter, yes, by faith we can come to Jesus. By faith we enter into this grace wherein we stand and rejoice in hope of the glory of God. And not only so, but we glory or rejoice in tribulations, knowing that tribulation worketh patience, and patience or endurance, and patience experience or character is another word, and experience hope. You know, when we go through these things, we're learning what it is to endure. You know, we're not home yet. We're not at the finish line yet. And the closer you get to the end of the race, your fatigue comes on, you get tired out. The nearer we get to heaven, you know, and God calling us home, the race might get a little bit harder. And if you haven't got a little endurance built up in it, you might not stand. It'd be terrible to go part way with Jesus and miss out on the last part of the race. So those trials are for a reason. And not only that, it makes you so you can feel with others. Not only that, you know, somehow you can just get a little glimpse of the sufferings that Jesus went through. You know, when you're in pain, we can't even, with the pain and things we suffer, begin to know what he went through. I know I had 5 nosebleeds in 1 week here before I came. I was suffering with some problems. And, you know, to think he gave his life's blood. You know, I get a little nervous when I get those bad nosebleeds. But he gave his life's blood. We can know a little bit of what the sufferings were like. But more than that, you know what? You get to know him better. You know, if you never had a problem, how would you know he could solve them, as Andre Crouch says in the song? You know, how would you know he really could do it? You go to school and they test you to see if you learned anything. But Peter said, don't stop. Keep on growing. Get to know Jesus better. You know, the longer you live with a person and fellowship with them, in communion with them, you begin to think like them. Sometimes they tell you, you begin to look like them. But that's what Jesus wants. We're predestined to be conformed to the very image of Jesus when we get to know him. And his supernatural power. I could tell you other healings and things that have taken place, but I've kept it quite a while now. But my desire is that if you're here and you haven't really kept growing in that knowledge of Jesus, it's more than just being introduced to him. You know, Jesus said, my sheep know my voice. And if you haven't had the fellowship with him that you should have had, when he calls up on that telephone, you're not going to know who's talking. But if you've really had communion with somebody, when my sons call me on the telephone right away, I know who's on the telephone. I know that voice. You know, when you have communion with the Lord Jesus Christ. He said, follow me. You get to know that voice. That's what he desires. And life becomes an adventure. Easy? No. Very humbling? Sometimes, yes. But God is faithful. And so, as Sister Chamberlin said, there's going to be some altar time. Maybe you're here and you don't even know Jesus. That's what life is about. You know, we're all going to stand, we're all going to die someday. It's pointed on the man. You know, science hasn't conquered that yet. They're searching all the time to prolong our lives, but they haven't done too much about it. You know, we're all heading that way. But, you know, sin did that. But Jesus, while we were sold into sin, and that's when death came in, that awful experience. But Jesus came in and bought us back, redeemed us, and paid the price for our salvation, the offering the supreme sacrifice. Praise God. So I think I'll turn the service back to Sister Chamberlin at this time. Thank you for having me.